Hello, this is Omnia. I'm the editor of the Etcher Observer. Joining me today, Milimo Banji. He does have a very interesting business, which is a social first creative agency that helps people find jobs, but through social media. And one of the mission of his agency is actually to prepare 100 million young individuals for the workforce. So welcome, and it's a pleasure speaking with you over the internet.
No, a real pleasure to be here.
Um,
Thank you so much for inviting me on here.
Feels very weird. I was going through your synopsis and I was like, I read one line that just struck me and it said, Generation Z is the first true digital native, and I'm a millennial. And I remember in the 1990s, we were so excited for the internet in 1996. So
Yeah.
it hurt me. However, I do want to understand from your perspective, what exactly is this generation facing when it comes to finding jobs and being part of the workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when we look at Generation Z, they are truly digital natives. And what I mean by that, these are young people who spend most of their time on social media. They're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook. You know, um, I myself, I'm 27, so you can call me a centennial Gen Z. So it's just a fancy way of saying if I was born a year earlier, I'd be a millennial. But I always take it. But we spend all of our time on social media. And some of the qualities that really define us is how we look at the future of work, what we value when it comes to work, things like, hybrid work, really important for us, a blend of that in office and remote working to cater to our desires for flexibility and autonomy at work. Things like being able to use AI and technologies for collaboration. It's become a really important part of our lives in the workplace. It's like I now have friends, who are Gen Z who will apply to jobs using artificial intelligence. They'll write their CV with artificial intelligence and they'll actually go into interviews and have an AI assistant next to them just to aid them in how they answer the questions. So it's like, how do companies begin to prepare for a workplace where you have these young people who care about how hybrid work, who care about technology in the workplace, who care about sustainability and sustainable work practices. What do companies need to be doing to ensure that they can cater themselves to this new breed of young people who are going to be entering the workplace? So just some of the things to really think about as an organization when you're looking
Right.
to attract and engage Gen Z to the workplace.
Someone would say they're spoiled. They have AI to help them to do the interviews. But seriously, some people would actually argue this is actually us. There's a question of ethics, but also there is a question of how you can't communicate as a human being. So how could you actually work with other human beings? And what do you think about that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one for us because when we look at the workplace, it is the first time that we've had five generations in the workplace. Everything from baby boomers all the way through to kind of Generation Z. These are five different generations all in one workplace. And that presents a multitude of different challenges for organizations, for businesses and employers. And the bigger picture here is like, how do you ensure there is that constant communication, there is collaboration? One person was born in the 60s and they have a completely different perspective and way of working. And on the other end, you've got Gen Z who have a completely different way of working, who view the world very differently, who have different expectations of the workplace. And yeah, a lot of people do call them lazy. People call Gen Z lazy. They're seen to be expectant of different things. They're seen to be individuals who, will pull a tantrum at work, and it's not uncommon to see people quiet quitting. I don't know if you've come across the term quiet quitting, but it's this term where Gen Z will go into work and they won't quit, but they'll just start doing a lot less.
Yeah.
They'll take their time to complete their tasks. They'll spend a bit longer on work and slowly quit. But eventually, you might just get an email from them 6 months in with them saying, I quit. And you're thinking, but we love you. We've done everything we can do to support you and to make sure this work is conducive for you. And there'll be no
Right.
explanation. And you as an employer has kind of scratched your head thinking, what have we done wrong here? So it's almost thinking in the workplace, how do you ensure the intergenerational collaboration when you've got five different generations all in a single all in a
Right.
single workforce?
Hmm. How about bridging the gap between them? Maybe using technology to actually engage different generations together? Is that an option? Or that's the only option, actually?
It's an interesting one, because with technologies like artificial intelligence in the workplace, there are opportunities, but there are also kind of risks to using things like artificial intelligence. We've seen it, I think I've mentioned with, CVs and getting into the workplace, but also we know that 86% of Gen Z really care about things like training and development. I see a massive opportunity there, where employers or organizations can utilize AI to train and develop young people when they come into the workplace. That's a massive opportunity. A lot of young people also cite the fact that, you know, one of the biggest reasons that Gen Z leave the workplace is because, their managers never have time to train and develop them. You know, uh, they'll leave because their managers will cite themselves being too busy. I'm too busy. I've got a lot on my plate. So their development is stunted. That's where technology and things like artificial intelligence can really come into play to offer Gen Z a structured system where they can, grow and develop. Where AI really comes short is things like mentorship, which is another important factor. I think 75% of Generation Z cite the importance of mentorship as a function of them growing and developing. That's an area where AI can't help. You know,
Right.
it's mentorship is very much a structured system. It works very well when it's structured, number one. But number two, you learn by observing an individuals that have been in that position, have made mistakes, have learned, and they can pass that information over to you. That's where the real value is. So in some areas, from a training development perspective, yes, artificial intelligence can bridge the gap. But on the other side, when we look at things like mentorship, it becomes very difficult to bridge that gap between AI and Gen Z development.
When we talk about Gen Z, I sometimes feel that we're talking as if that's 50,000 people. All of them look the same. All of them behave the same. All of them walk the same. They live in the same area. But we're talking about generation that is spread around across the world, and not all of them are behaving in a similar manner. Now, the question is, how can a company actually deal with a new generation that it comes from different within itself? There are different backgrounds. How can a company deal with that?
Yeah, so I think first to your initial point, I fully agree. I think people have this misconception that Gen Z is a handful of people and they're a single homogenous group and they all act and think exactly the same way. The truth could not be further from the truth. We do see nuances in Generation Z from all across the world. Your Gen Z in the Middle East, a different Gen Z in North America, and Gen Z in Europe. There are differences, and there are also similarities. That's the first thing to be said. The other thing to be said as well is there's a misconception that Gen Z are young. They're like under 21. They're maybe, 16 to 21. Truth of the matter is Gen Z are aged between their birth years are between 1996 and 2012, which means at the age of 27, you're still Gen Z.
Mhm.
So people who have gone past the early talent stage of their work and are now in those mid to senior positions are still also Gen Z. We're seeing middle
Mm.
managers who actually are described as Generation Z in the workplace. So yeah, when we think about what companies should be doing, when we think about what companies can do to ensure that they're able to cater for the different types of Generation Zs in the workplace, again, it's looking at how do you foster collaboration across generations? How do you introduce things like bringing in we've seen this work really well with a few organizations where they've brought in a Gen Z consultant. I bet you're asking, what's a Gen Z consultant? This is somebody that comes into a business, they're paid for by the business, and their responsibility or their role is to ensure that Gen Z are looked after in the workplace. They engage really well. They're given adequate training. They're able to build community and also learn and teach what they're learning to other generations in the workplace. We've seen this done really, really well by a company called Dentsu. Dentsu is a really, really massive agency. They're a global agency. They've managed to do that really well. And they've actually seen Gen Z retention go up by 9%, which is extraordinary, right?
Mhm. Yes, it is. But at the same time, I don't know. I still feel something is uneasy here. Something is really not clicking. Um, let's talk about the 100 million young people you want to find a job for. Maybe we'll take it from that perspective.
Yeah.
How are you going to find them jobs?
I don't know.
Don't make promises. Don't make
That's
promises.
that's the question I keep asking myself. No, it's a massive challenge. And I'll really be honest with you, there's something that really drives us, which is big, hairy, audacious goals. We're conscious that in the UK alone, or in Europe, or in the world, you know, there's more than 100 million Gen Zs. The population of the UK on its own is about what, 65 million. So of course, we're not going to be able to achieve our goal in just the UK. The vision for us here is to be global. We want to be a global organization supporting a multitude of Gen Zs and young people who are based in North America or based in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia. And our focus is to leverage technology and to also leverage social media as the channel or the conduit to actually support these 100 million young people. What we found is things like TikTok, things like social media at the moment taking over. You know, if you look at what happened last year with TikTok, there were more searches on TikTok than there were on Google last year. And a lot of that search volume, 67% of that search volume is driven by these young people. So for us, it makes it really clear that for us to reach these 100 million young people, we need to be leveraging number one, social media, but number two, technology. And it's beautiful that things like AI are starting to really shift the social landscape and the world of work. But at the same time, social media is also massively exploded to the point at which anyone can be a TikTok star. You can jump on Omnia, you can jump on TikTok, do a couple of videos and go viral. And before you know it, you're like, do you know what? I'm quitting my job now. I'm just gonna do this full time.
You know, when you were talking now, I was thinking about a friend who was telling me, if you want to make more money, just go dance on TikTok. And then maybe I'll leave my job. But it's just very interesting. It's just it sounds like a lot, to be honest. There was a lot going on. We spoke about integrating Generation Z into the workplace, finding them jobs, leveraging digital tools or technological tools, better words, to enhance their capabilities. It seems like a lot going on. That is overwhelming in itself.
Mm.
I can imagine an HR manager sitting down in their office and thinking, "Oh my God, what have I done? I should have been a doctor." But that's a lot. So how do you think firms should go around with this? What would you advise in terms of a talent management strategy to make sure that, yes, I'm bringing all this in and handling things at the same time?
Yeah, a very good question. I think the answer to that question actually starts with, you mentioned it in your question. It's actually building a strategy, so thinking through everything from how do we understand this generation and what do we understand about this generation? First and foremost, that could look like research, that could look like insights. Could you do some research to understand perceptions that Gen Z have of you as an employer? Could you do some internal research to understand the current experiences of Gen Z in your business and use the insights and the data that you pertain from that research to begin building a strategy? And that strategy needs to be all encompassing. It needs to cover everything from attraction all the way through to retention. and from an attraction perspective, is thinking, right, how are we going to reach these young people? What channels are we going to be using? Are we going to be on LinkedIn? Are we going to be using job boards? The data suggests that no, it's not going to be LinkedIn. It's not going to be job boards. The data suggests that 80% of these young people are spending their time on social media. So yeah, you're going to need to have social media as part of your strategy. We're also seeing things like influencers be a massive or play a massive part in the attraction phase. How do you leverage those? So looking at data first and insights, then thinking, how does attraction look like? How does the recruitment process look like? How are you bringing people on board? How does the application process look like? How do your assessments look like? How does onboarding look like? And
Right.
then building a strategy for that. Then you're then thinking about retention. How do we keep these young people within the business? How do we ensure that they're able to stay here longer than 6 months, longer than 1 year? And what does that internal retention strategy look like? So it's an overarching strategy which begins with research and works its way through all the way through to retention.
What about security? Because as you said, 80% are actually spending their time on social media, and there has been questions over social media, etc., when it comes to security. How can it's not the company's problems, but let's say company X is actually hiring through social media, and I decided to use company's X to hire for something completely different, but I'm using the reputation and the name. That kind of opens companies to much more of a bigger headache, right?
Yeah, and that's where companies have brand teams. That's where companies really invest in their kind of employer brand teams. And we've seen it. I think every large organization that has anywhere between 100 plus employees will have a brand team. And their focus is thinking about risk. It's thinking about contingency plans. It's thinking about, what's the risk appetite for us as a brand to engage in social media. We
Right.
see 98, 99% of employers. We've only come across maybe two in the last year. Employers that said, hey, we just don't do social media. We don't want to be on social. We want to be a quiet brand. But the majority of brands want to be on social. The appetite is there. And they have the internal infrastructure and teams to ensure that,
Right.
there is enough of an opportunity and less risk when they engage on social.
Right. I just want to ask you one final question, which is, what do you think is the most appealing component for generation? I mean, again, we can't generalize, but from those who you have met and dealt with and was able to allocate into companies, what do you think is the most important component that makes them realize, oh yes, I want to work for this company? Other than, of course, the fairness and the equity and all that stuff. What other than that?
Good question.
Sorry.
uh, how do you boil this down into a single element? For me, here's what I would say, right? A company's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion is number one. We've seen this in two places. Number one, the data suggests that. But number two, we've conducted a separate study where we just spoke to diverse talent. In fact, we've built the UK's largest and most comprehensive study on Black Gen Z. And what came out was number one was a company's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What that means is before Gen Z apply to work for you, they're looking at your website, they're looking at your social media, they're looking at all your channels to see how diverse you are. They're looking at and seeing what the commitment you have or you've made towards diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like. And if that ticks all their boxes, then the
Yes.
challenge is, are you living everything you've shown on your website, on your social media, on your job boards? Are you living that? Is that diversity reflected when they join? And that's the biggest factor for me, I would say, to Gen Z applying and joining companies.
Lovely. It was a great pleasure speaking with you, and I definitely look forward to talking to you more at HRS EKSA. Thank you very much for your time.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, Mia. And I'm looking forward to speaking in a couple of months.